You turn back on the recording? There we go. So this is part 18. Elia. So if I open up in Stone's Tanakh on page 30, or Ezekiel 36, at the top of the page is the tail end of 34, which we had talked about. And it's describing what's going to happen once Elohim brings people back. So we talked about this, I think it was last week. So let me read it part again. Verse 24 of Ezekiel 34. And I, Yahweh, will be Elohim to them, and my servant David, a prince among them. I, Yahweh, have spoken. Now, when he says, I, Yahweh, have spoken, or if he says, Nam Yahweh, or he says, Nam Adonai Yahweh, he's basically saying, I am making this statement, and it will happen. It can't not happen. The end of the world can't happen if this hasn't happened yet. It just can't. It's impossible. It can't happen unless what he said has happened. Has it happened yet that he, in his full face of value, is Elohim to his people? No. Go back, verse 13 of Ezekiel 34. I will remove them from the people and gather them from the lands and bring them to their soil, and I will tend them upon the mountains of Israel, in the streams and all the land's habitations. We're still here. It hasn't happened yet because I'm his people. I choose to be his people. And I'm still out here in the countryside of Oregon. So this verse hasn't happened. Verse 25, I will seal a covenant of peace with them and abolish evil beasts from the land. And they will dwell securely in the wilderness and sleep in the forest. You can't do that even here. There, like I said last week, people are turning loose venomous snakes, hybridized wild boars, possibly even reptiles, flying reptiles, things that they've been trying to blend species that scientists have been doing in underground labs for many decades. It's not just brand new, but now they can do stuff they couldn't do before. And from what I understand, you don't necessarily want to go sleep in the forest anymore. And it's like, well, 100 years ago, there was a lot of, you might say, grizzly bears and cougars and wild Indians or bad mountain men, or somebody was going to just make life miserable. And then all of a sudden, in the 1960s and 70s, it's like, wow, the forests were wide open. You could go hike, you could go camping, you could go backpacking, nothing to be afraid of. And it's like all of a sudden, it's like that little window of opening is kind of almost closing again, at least from stories I hear, things that go bump in the night, creepy things that people get pictures of on their cell phones. And it's like, what the heck are these things? Are they projections? Are they imaginary? Are they really? I don't know, but just saying, this verse hasn't happened yet. Then, verse 26, then I will make them and the surroundings of my hill, is that the mountain of Yah? What does that mean? Into a blessing, and I will bring the rain in its time. There'll be rains of blessing, not tornadoes and hurricanes and things that just rip everything apart. It'll be rains of blessing. The tree of the field will yield its fruit. The earth will yield its produce. Okay, so there's not going to be this governmental mandate to toxify, to poison, to do genetic modification of your vegetation if you're a farmer. They will be secure upon the land. They'll know that I am Yahweh when I break the rods of their yoke and rescue them from the hands of those who enslave them. We're still enslaved. If you know anything about the all capital letter name and the corporate fiction and the banksters and all blah, blah, all that other stuff, they will know, verse 28, they will no longer be spoils for the nations, and the beasts of the land will no longer devour them. They will dwell securely, and none will make them afraid. I will establish for them a planting of renown. They will no longer be dominated or decimated by famine in the land. They will no longer bear the shame of the nation. See, part of the curse was that Yahweh would kick his people out of the land and not bless them and make them be the slaves and make them be the scoundrels and the scum and the disdain. And everybody will look at them and say, big galoot. What? Galoot? Well, Mel Blanc, the guy who did voices of cartoons, Jewish guy, knew that the word galoot means one who was disdained for being an idiot and getting kicked out of the land because he had betrayed the covenant, and that's a Jewish term or a Yiddish term of the greatest disregard. Big galoot. Well, that's the Celt. That's the Galatian. Gaul, Gaul, that was known as what's now basically Central Europe, France. He kicked us out of the land and then made us bear the shame of being infidels. And he turned the twinkle of his eye, the apple of his eye, the beauty of his eye into just absolute degradation, shame. Everybody just looked at them with a sneer and kicked them in the face. And I mean, they were like the scum of the earth. So you could say, well, why does everybody hate the Jews? Well, the Jews, they're the Jews. No, it's because of that attitude right there. It's part of the curse. It's not just the Jews. It's all of the 10 tribes to the north also. But verse 30 of Ezekiel 34, then they will know that I, Yahweh, their Elohim, am with them. Well, Elohim with us, well, that's Emmanuel, right? And that they are my people, the house of Israel. Nam Adonai Yahweh, that they are my people, the house of Israel. That's an absolute restoration of favor, of blessing, of him being the overt, blatant champion of his people, which hasn't happened. Well, when and how? Now you are the sheep. You are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture. You are man, you are Adam. I am your Elohim. He's basically saying, there's another verse, I think it's in Psalms, where it's saying, we're like sheep to be consumed by the other nations. What, does that make you happy? Hello? Why are we just like sheep to be killed all the day long? Well, because we were under the curse, and because we didn't want to listen to his voice, and because we betrayed the covenant, and he said to his people repeatedly, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. But then there's another verse, I forget where it is offhand, he says, as most certainly as when I told them they would bring the curse upon themselves and I would pour out my furious wrath upon my own people. And I didn't pull back my hand from doing so. I did it. I made it happen because I said so. He said, I'm telling you, go on record. I will most certainly, even more so, pull you back and pour you out my blessing, my favor, my compassion upon you. Luxuriantly. Well, that hasn't happened yet. Then if you jump into Ezekiel 35, there's another prophecy of Edom, and he says, in verse 15, down at the tail end of that chapter, in accordance with your rejoicing that the heritage of the house of Israel had become desolate, so will I do to you. You shall be desolate, Mount Seir, and every bit of Edom. Then they'll know that I am Yahweh. It's like, then they'll know. See, he keeps saying, then they'll know. Why? He says, listen, I'm going to whack my people. I'm going to punish my people. And if any of you else laugh, point, think that it's your chance to come in and grab the spoils and run off with it, well, you can, but you're going to get in trouble for how you do that. And I remember hearing once back in 2005, I believe it was, a friend of mine saw on the internet a thing called I think it was called the Palestinian Charter. And right there in their own writing, they said, we know that the people of Israel are Elohim's favored Kadoshi, and I forget exactly how they word it, but they said, we also know that his people are under the terms of banishment, of this exile, this curse, this dispersion, and that we have the right legally to go in and steal their stuff, to kill them, to torment them, because once it changes, we'll never have this chance. So let's do that right now. And that's somehow written up in the Palestinian Charter. It's like, really? The Palestinian people who wrote up that charter, the government officials, know that they're not the same as the people of Israel, but maybe they are. That's a whole other story. But the thing is, they say, we know that when Elohim, let's say as their father, is punishing them, and he says, you kids drop your toys right now in the yard and go stand in the corner or go to your room. It's like, yeah, but what about all their toys in the yard? Well, let the neighborhood kids play with it. It's like neighborhood kids go, really? And they come in and they grab everything, and they bust it up and they break it. And The father saying, when my kid gets back out of the time of being in trouble, now you guys are going to get in trouble for what you just did to their stuff, even though I let you do it. And it's like, is that the way this thing works? Apparently so. Then you get into chapter 36, and you go down to verse 19. Well, let's back up. Verse 17. This is now talking about what it's going to be like again. He says, verse 17, no, 11. I will multiply man and animal upon you, speaking to the land of Israel, and they will multiply and be fruitful. I will make you inhabited as in your earlier times, and I will make it better than it was at your beginning. Then you'll know that I am Yahweh. And he's talking to the land, better than at your beginning. But remember when Abraham and Lot came to the land, it was like the Garden of Eden. It was lush, which is why Lot chose that one place, which is now just barren, dry, brimstone and sulfur, and nothing can grow there. And he says, Yahweh says, no, I'm going to change everything. I'm going to make it better. And there's another place that said it'll be like the Garden of Eden. And it's like, he's got to either shift the poles of the earth or somehow change the whole environmental ecosystem. It's nothing like it appears right now. It hasn't happened yet. And this is not the end of the world yet when he makes this happen. This is almost like the time where the land seems dead and the people seems dead. Is almost like the 3 days and 3 nights that Yahusha was in the crypt, in the tomb. Because when the tomb opens up and he comes out, his disciples didn't even recognize him. Did he not have the same facial characteristics? It's not just, our friend, this guy that we walked around with for 70 weeks was marred. His face was torn up with the lash and the crown of thorns. And they knew what he looked like when he's still in one piece. And now they don't even recognize him. Maybe he had different facial features. Maybe he looked somehow different. But he came back in the strength and power of a different type of life than even normal humanity, though he was cooking fish and he ate it, and Thomas put his finger in the nail holes in his hands, and it's like there was something the same, there was something not the same. He could walk through walls. I mean, what the heck? Transport not limited by time and space. We don't know, but if it's going to be better than it was at our beginning, was that the times of Moshe? Was that the time of Abraham? Was that the time of Adam? Noah? I will cause man to mock upon you, my people Israel, and they will inherit you. Then you'll be theirs for a possession, and you'll be no longer bereaved of them. So he's talking to the land as if the land is saying, I want people upon me. He built flowers to be pollinated by bees, and if there's no bees and the flowers put out their blossom and they go, oh, there's no bees. Their whole reason for being is waste. But the land of Israel is to be walked upon, to be inhabited, to flourish with plants and animals and people doing things, building things, walking around, growing things. That's what he has in mind. And so this entire consciousness of, the world can't handle too many people, it's a lie. The ecology is all messed up and warming and too cold and too carbon footprint, it's all a lie. The world can't grow enough food, it's all a lie. And it'll change when Yahweh brings his people back to his land. Maybe it won't change over the face of the entire earth, but it'll certainly change in at least his land, and it hasn't happened yet. Speaking to, I mentioned this the other week, but speaking of Jerusalem, therefore you will no longer devour people. You will never again drive out your nations. I will no longer, verse 15 of Ezekiel 36, I will no longer allow the derision of nations to be heard about you, and you will no longer bear the shame of the peoples, and you will never again cause your nations to falter. You see, something is built into that place where the Shem of Yahuwah will be exalted. That is somehow intrinsically tied to the land, and for him to speak to the land, for him to speak to the city of Jerusalem and speak to his people and speak to the other nations, what's going on here? He said when he brought his people, when he picked up Abraham and said, go, get out of the land of Ur, Don't just go up to where your father's place is to the north, but go down into the land of Canaan, and I don't have a place here, it's already occupied. Walk. Wherever you walk, wherever the sole of your foot lands, that I will give to your people, your children, the inheritance after you will be wherever you put your foot. Okay? So we did. And it's like, well, how big is that territory? There's a place where he talks about going all the way up to the Euphrates River. The river is Egypt, and it's bigger than just this little piece of Israel right now. And it's like, that hasn't happened yet. So something controlling the limit of national borders today has to change. He didn't say it has to change where a bunch of people get beat up and stuff stolen from them. But he's got to balance the scales of justice. Well, that's nun shin pei tet. It's that word that last week we said, oh, that was translated, I'm going to contend with you. And it's nun shin pei tet. I'm going to balance the scales and make everything as I said. Everything I said is going to happen. Well, that's nun shin pei tet. That's a good thing. Somehow or other, he's got to bring us back to the wilderness, make us pass under the rod, or bring us back to the language, divide us into tribes, and make everything happen the way he said he would. That's another way to read that sentence, which hasn't happened yet. But by us coming back to the language and his ways and understanding how he is different than any Lord, any God, any would-be Messiah that has obliterated or doesn't have his people teach his ways, his Moedim, his language, isn't him, isn't authorized by him other than to sustain the curse. And any true Mashiach would have to teach everything Yahuwah says and everything he does. And if that hasn't happened yet, or it's starting to happen now, well, we're not quite there yet. Verse 19, I scattered them among the nations, and they were dispersed among the lands. According to their way and according to their acts did I judge them. You see, he's not just getting a bad attitude and throwing down lightning bolts. According to our way. Everything happens. Everything is a reverse action of what we've already done. According to a man's way is returned upon his own head. That's mishpat. So when we keep the Sabbath day, that's returned. When we walk in his moedim and do them, that's returned. When we do justice and truth and righteousness and kindness, that's returned. So how do we change the big, ugly, mean face of Elohim? If you see a big, nasty face in the mirror, how do you change that face? Boom, instantly changed. It's a mirror. It's a gimel mem. God means even so back at you. Gimel mem lamed, gimel. That's the camel. Gimel, that's like the gall. That's the turning of the revolving door. How did the ones in exile come back to the land? Verse 20, they came among the nations where they came, and they desecrated my holy name. When it was said to them, hey, these are the people of Yahweh, but they departed his land. In other words, when his people got kicked out of the land and became known as, these are the exile, these are the galut. Well, what are they doing here? Well, they were kicked out of the land because they desecrated his name. Well, what are they doing now? Well, instead of making his name Kadosh, they're picking up all the customs and Elohim Achrim of the lands where they were. And they retained the blasphemy. Instead of saying, boy, we learned our lesson and we're now going to proclaim his Shem Hagadol. They didn't. Verse 21, I took pity on my Shem Kadosh, my holy name, it says here, which the house of Israel had desecrated among the nations where they came. Therefore say to the house of Israel. This is Ezekiel 36:22. Thus says, when he said, Nam Yahweh, when he says it, again, we have to get in our mind, everything he says has to happen. It's absolutely, the end of the world can't happen until what he says happens. Because we hear all these other voices of the end of the world and the end of the age, the end of the dispensation, and blah, 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 blah. What did he say? Thus says Adonai Yahweh, it is not for your sake that I act, O house of Israel, but for my Shem Kadosh, that you have desecrated among the nations. Wherever you were sent, wherever you came, Verse 23, I will sanctify my great name that is I will make kadosh my Shem HaGadol, that is desecrated, that's made Chet Lamed Lamed, among the nations that you have desecrated among them. Then the nations will know that Ani Yahweh, Nam Adonai Yahweh, when I become sanctified through you before their eyes. So what does that mean? So as I said a couple weeks ago, somebody was telling me, hey, we don't do anything. It's not up to us. We just sit here. And he says, okay, it's like somebody having a puppet. And he says, okay, when I decide to do something, I'll do it through my puppet. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to sit here, and if I want to change the TV channel, I'm going to put the puppet on my hand and reach over and make the puppet push the TV channel, and then come back and say, okay. It's like, really? Or is it that Yahweh says, listen, Israel, you have a proactive job to do. I told you your job was to make Kadosh my Shem HaGadol. Make sacred, as it really is, Kadosh, my Shem, my name, fame, renown, and reputation, Gadol, Gimel Dalet Vav Lamed, which is majestic, high, of great grandeur and magnitude, awe, and respect. Well, how do you do that? It's not by amalgamating his ceremonial days with every heathen and pagan ritual you can find, which is like Christmas, Easter, and Halloween. Say, oh, it's the birthday of baby Jesus. No, it's keeping his Moedim. That's what he said. It's not working on the seventh day Yom HaShabbat. That's what he said. So until his people, while they're scattered across the face of the earth, stop proliferating the confusion, the distortion, the blending with the other cultures, and come back to the purity. If that's what he's saying, well, as far as my experience goes, it's only just now happening. Since 2010, hey, what do you know? The end of the 2007 30-year curse. Since 2010, it's like, okay, I'm not going to work on Saturday. And whether that's the seventh day or if it's lunar phase, that's another conversation. But at least if Ignatius set up this thing about the first day of the week and Constantine made it a law, we are intentionally declaring a change from the written with the finger of Elohim to the Jewish people. The seventh day, we're declaring for the Christian people, it's going to be the first day to honor the fact Jesus rose from the dead. All that's a big lie. All that's a big distortion. It's not true. It's not his. It doesn't belong to Yahweh. It's not his stuff. And once you see that it's not his stuff, it's like, well, what is his stuff? What did he declare as his stuff? Well, the word for my stuff is Lamed Yod. And to declare Lamed Yod is to Hey the Lamed Yod. So for him to say, I will, my stuff, make evident, that's Alef Lamed Yod Hei. Well, that's Eliah. Going back to the original conversation, days of Elijah isn't just, well, when that prophet or guy with a prophetic mantle starts saying this and doing that, and it's like, when he says, I will now make my stuff evident, well, that's Alef Lamed Yod Hei. So, the whole reason for this motif of this brilliant thing shrouded with a darker thing that I've been trying to keep as a consistency for these past now 18 sessions is because even though it looks like this darkness of what's that? It's kind of obscure. There's this promise of turning around the exile into this incredible discovery and bringing us back to the blatant reality. This is just kind of a graphic motif of that. So he goes on to say, I will take you, this is verse 24 of Ezekiel 36, I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the lands, and I will bring you back to your soil. Hasn't happened yet. Then I will sprinkle pure water upon you that you may become cleansed. You see, we don't become cleansed out here in the nations. He'll bring us back to the land and cleanse us. But somehow we have to change our consciousness and make his Shem, Hagadol, Kadosh, in the ayin of the Goyim amongst whom we're scattered. And that's what's happening. That's why we're doing these video talks. And I will cleanse you from all your contamination and from all your idols. Well, if there's anything idolatrous about our doctrine, our belief in the Christ figure, the Messiah, the nailing the law to the cross, if there's anything idolatrous about that, it's got to go. It's got to be eliminated. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. Hey, that sounds pretty New Testament. I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. Oh, okay. I will put my spirit within you. My ruach I will put within you. Gee, that sure sounds New Testament. And I will make it so that you will follow my decrees, guard my observances, and fulfill them. Well, that doesn't sound New Testament. You will dwell in the land I gave to your forefathers. You will be a people to me, and I will be Elohim to you. Hasn't happened yet. I will save you from all your contaminations. In other words, anything that we eat that we're told didn't matter does matter, because that's one of his instructions. We're not going to have bacon on our cheeseburgers. We're not going to have shrimp scampi. We're not going to have catfish and sturgeon. I will summon the grain and increase it. I will not afflict famine upon you. So whatever GMO and chemical toxicities that they're putting into the land, making it Roundup ready, that's got to stop. I will increase the fruit of the tree and the produce of the field, so you will no longer be subject to the shame of hunger among the nations. See, us not having enough food or having to eat toxic poison produce, that's part of the curse. He's going to change it. And so now they have this stuff, they're putting labels on fruit that it appeal, so that your fruit can stay looking good for like 3 years. One time I was at a motel and they had a buffet thing, or like a little breakfast. Hey, nice looking apples, and that looks like real food, and bit into the thing, and there was like a 1/4 inch of natural colored, call it the meat of the apple, and the entire central core of the apple was rotted brown. It's like some toxic preservative kept a 1/4 inch shell on that apple in the skin, looking it was like it was perfectly good, and the inside was just polluted. Gosh, what have they done to our food? Well, Yahweh's going to change that. Verse 31, then you will remember your evil ways and your deeds that were not good, and you will be disgusted with yourselves in your own sight because of your iniquities, because of your abominations. Not for your sake do I act, Nam Adonai Yahweh. Let this be known to you. Be embarrassed and ashamed of your ways, O house of Israel. Then he goes down a couple more verses, 35. People will say, this very land that had been desolate has become like the Garden of Eden. And the ruined, desolate, and demolished cities have been fortified and inhabited. So you go over there to the land of Israel now, and people are archaeologists looking around, and they're finding these stone walls, digging around and digging layer upon layer deep. And it's like, this hasn't happened, because when those things are rebuilt, you won't be excavating to find ancient cities. You'll be living in the new cities on top of it. Right now, there's a few kibbutzes and a few cities, but from what I understand, Jerusalem, somebody said it was like a mausoleum. It's like, dead people, especially on Shabbat. And Tel Aviv is it's the pretty sacrilegious and worldly. I forget the labels they put on them, but nothing is kadosh about those places like what I'm reading here. And then he gets into chapter 37. Last verse of 36, so will the destroyed cities be filled with flocks of people. Then they'll know that I am Yahweh. So it's like, well, who's Yahweh? The guy who causes it to exist. The guy who says it and makes it appear so. I have this plan, that I will express it in what I build is expressing, and what I built expresses, and there's a connection with what it is. And so the connection, he built it to be, it has to be, but the Vav is missing. Somehow this Vav is like, well, the Mashiach, yeah, but how many people believe in the right Mashiach? It's like, if the Vav man is Yahusha, or if we should be like that, we should make this connection. How do we have the missing link? Vav is like this connector, the missing link between the Hey and the Hey of the. For Israel to come back, to walk in his ways, and make everything he said happen, because we're walking in his ways, Therefore, everything that he built with potential to be expressed hasn't because of the missing link, because of his people Israel that he wants to work through. It'll go back to say then the grand plan can be expressed because it's already built to do so if we just walk in his ways and listen to his voice. Well, that's written into his name. So then you go into 37, one piece of wood, where we have to have the same mind. That hasn't happened yet. And then chapter 37 of verse 24, my servant David will be king over them, and there will be one shepherd for all of them. They will follow my ordinances, keep my decrees, and fulfill them. Well, then to say, well, the Christian believes in the Christ figure, the Messiah, the Mashiach of Israel, but the Jews don't, it's like, well, they have to come to the same terms. Well, if the Christians think that the law was nailed to the cross and done away with, so therefore they don't have to do anything Yahweh said, you can't have one piece of wood, one ayin zadi, one understanding of the inherent responsibility and obligation of what it means to be Israel. And it says in the New Testament that will be grafted into the house of Israel as proselytes, then there is no bride of Christ who doesn't walk in the ways of Yahuwah. Can't be. Wait a minute. Does that mean that the concept of the bride of Christ, who doesn't have to follow his ordinances and keep his decrees and fulfill them, is a bogus concept? Then no good person, Jewish person, say from the southern kingdom, who says, you can't have that doctrine. The two will never become one stick in his hand until the people that recognize Yahusha being Mashiach also realize that they must, it's the inherent responsibility, unavoidable, to follow his ordinances, keep his decrees, and fulfill them. And then if you look at what those words are, the word translated ordinance is mishpat, balancing of scales, and the word translated decree is het kuf, chok. And to observe is shamar, and to do is ayin shin, hey, and then fulfill them is the word just translated them is Alef Vav Tav Mem. Well, the mem suffix is the plural. Them might be Tav Mem, which is perfect, but Alef Vav Tav, hey, that's like a letter of the alphabet. That's oath. That's the meaning of every letter as being the sworn oath full of stipulations of what it means to be his people. Well, if we can't agree what that means, then this can't happen. It hasn't happened yet. So somehow for this to happen, I could put it into general terms like all of the variegations of who the 10 tribes to the north have become, and a bunch of them are harbored in the Christian covering, ideology, consciousness, Hebrew roots of the Christian faith, Hebrew roots of the Shinto faith, they have a sense of Hebrew something, but they don't know because they won't come back and follow his ordinances and keep his decrees and fulfill them. They must in order for Ezekiel 37 to happen. Well, then that means Ezekiel 38 can't happen yet. It says, verse 25 of Ezekiel 37, once they follow my ordinances and keep my decrees, then they will dwell on the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, within which your forefathers dwelled. So there's got to be artifacts in the land. And yeah, there's artifacts of ancient writings in Hebrew and Paleo-Hebrew in America and other countries, but that's because those people were kicked out and scattered across the face of the earth. Where'd they come from? And if it's that land over there, then that's where he has to bring us back to, which he hasn't done yet. They and their children and their children's children will dwell upon it forever. Well, wait a minute. The word forever doesn't mean forever. It's olam, which means beyond the horizon of what's visible or comprehensible. It's translated forever. But that's a long time. Could be 1,000 years. Hasn't happened. And when this does happen, that he brings us back, it's not the end of the world yet for maybe a long time, maybe 1,000 years. I'm just saying because there's this concept of the 7th millennium. And I will seal a covenant of peace with them. It will be an eternal covenant. Well, that's Brit Olam. So again, is it eternal? Is it forever? Or is it just like this beyond the horizon? and I will emplace them and increase them, and I will place my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be among them. I will be Elohim to them. They will be a people to me. Then the nations will know that I am Yahweh who sanctifies or makes Israel kadosh, when my mikdash, or when my place of kadoshness, will be among them forever. Is it the place, meaning the land, or is it the concept of who he really is? Well, if the concept of who he really is retained by his Moedim, not Christmas, Easter, and Halloween and Sunday, then the Christian church as we know it must bail out of that ship. Get thrown overboard like Jonah. You've got to ditch wherever that ship is headed, because it ain't him. It's not true. And as long as the people who call themselves his people, the bride of Christ, as long as they are retaining iconology and ceremony of Elohim Achrim, of pagan deity that's not Yahweh's Avod of Israel, they're either not his people, or they're not of the house of Israel that's going to be brought back to dwell on the land, in which case they're risking their eternity, that they aren't even in the camp, because one of the 12 doors is the 12 tribes. There's no Baptist and Episcopalian and Catholic and Orthodox and Lutheran doors to the new kingdom of Jerusalem. It's not there. It's bogus. It's false. It's fake. It's anti-Christ. Then we jump into Ezekiel 38. First verse. The word of Yahweh came to me saying, Son of man, direct your face towards Gog and the land of Magog. What does that mean? Now, it picks up again in the book of Revelation, Gog and Magog. And it's like, so some people think there's 2 or 3 wars. There's this war that has to happen before the 1,000 years, and then another one with Gog and Magog after the 1,000 years. If you read down a little bit further, it talks about all the different people. And then it says, verse 8 of Ezekiel 38, you will be repaid for your sins of ancient times. In the end of years, you will come to a land restored from the sword, gathered from many nations upon the mountains of Israel that had lain desolate continuously, to people who have been brought out from the nations, all of them dwelling in security. You will attack. You, speaking of Gog and Magog, you will attack like a storm. You will come. You'll be like a cloud covering the earth, you and all your cohorts and many nations with you. Now, wait a second. What has to happen before 38 is Ezekiel 37 and 36. So the people of Elohim that got themselves scattered across the face of the earth, like throwing seeds and scattering across the entire face of the earth, Yahweh says that they will make his Shem Hagadol, his great name, Kadosh. They will somehow come to the consciousness of the truth, of the reality of who Yahweh is, what he has done, and how this whole thing plays out, which is the stuff we're talking about, mapped by the Hebrew alphabet and mapped by Yahusha's chronological in sequence order, Aleph through Tav, equivalency to the alphabet letters of his coming to earth, being born of the woman, being crucified, being in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, coming out of the tomb, resurrecting back to life, and then ascending up and then coming back. All that has to be understood and fit so that the consciousness of all these scattered people of Israel can go, well, finally, I get it, I see it. And when that happens, then he's going to pick up his people and bring them back to the land. And then people say, just like he said, look, the Elohim of Israel does what he said. That's what he means when he says, Ani Yahweh, and it must be so. And it hasn't been yet. Just hasn't been yet. We're still sitting here scattered across the face of the earth. But when it does, and he makes the land, which is right now, as of 2023, parched and desolate. Yeah, there's a few things growing, but look, you got guys flying in on hang gliders and motorcycles and tearing up the farms. And you've got, the Persians rattling their sabers and the people to the north and all around there, we're going to get you, we're going to get you. And it's like, they're not dwelling in security. They're cranking up their military and having to call in the Yankees to supplement their armaments. And it's like, oh, come on, really? Sure doesn't sound like what we just read. He says, in the end of years, in the end of days, you will come to a land restored from the sword. Has it been restored from the sword? No. Has he gathered all his people? No. Well, then 38 can't happen yet. But when 38 does happen, verse 10, thus says Adonai Yahweh, it will be on the day that ideas will arise in your heart. Hey, why? And you will conceive a wicked design. You will say, hey, I'm going to advance against the land of open towns. I will come up against a tranquil people who dwell securely. All of them living without a protective wall. They have neither bars nor doors. Well, see, in the ancient days, you always had to have a wall around your place. Keep out the wild animals, keep out the invaders. Solomon had invented special doors. There's things called star forts. If you ever looked at one of those from a tactical perspective, it's like, boy, whoever designed those star forts, if you had an invading army, you could get them from all these different directions. They were really defended really well. But these guys won't have any thought of that. Why? As we just read, we'll be able to sleep in the forest without thinking of a bear or a cougar coming up on you, or getting rolled in the night by some bum, some criminal. You won't have any thoughts of enemies. We'll be in tranquility. Why? Yahweh is our Elohim. Yahweh is our Elohim. He watches over us, protects us, and whacks anybody who comes up against us. And Yahweh says, then they'll know what I mean when I say, but all the time up until now, he's had his back turned. We haven't seen any of this. We don't even know. We can imagine, we can fantasize about what it looked like if Yahweh was really our Elohim, if he really healed us from all of our afflictions, if he really did what he said he would do. Life would look a little different, I can imagine. I can imagine that if Yahweh was my Elohim and he really did what he said, well, I'd be. Think of all the great exploits in the book of Jasher. Judah and Simeon could roar, and all the tough military on the wall would wet their pants and go running away because they're scared. Literally, they could run up the side of a wall. They could yell and the walls would crumble. They could, what was it, Issachar or Naphtali could run faster than a deer. And it's like, what? The book of Jasher almost reads like Marvel Comics, superheroes. And it's like, if Yahweh was really our Elohim, would we even need to have superheroes? Maybe everybody's just afraid of us and leave us alone and bring tribute. That's the way it says in some verses. It just hasn't happened yet. But I can imagine, and then if I could say, wrap my imagination around the 22 letters. Boy, if I can read these 22 letters, I can see Yahusha, the Mashiach of Israel, in them. Wow. And if I can imagine the 22 letters as being blessings, then Zion isn't death, crucifixion, but Zion is spectacular, put on display, is like the Yom HaShabbat. See, there's different ways to read each letter. Verse 12, to seize booty and take spoils, Gog and Magog are going to turn your hand against resettled ruins, against the people gathered from the nations, which possess livestock and property, who dwell upon the navel of the earth. Dwell upon the navel of the earth. Mentioned that a couple weeks ago. What is that word, navel? And it's tet, bet, vav, resh. Well, bet, resh is pure and clean. Bet, vav, resh is to articulate, pronounce, speak. And tet, bet is the root of the word tov, or tet, vav, bet, or tet, yov, bet. A basket full of goodness, of articulation. Well, that's like knowing what this language really means. And if Hebrew really is the word of John 1:1, and it's the root language of everybody that ever walked the face of the earth, all the other languages are spun out from it, then there's something about coming back to the real meaning of these words. And realizing that when Yahweh speaks to the land and talks about Jerusalem as if it had a consciousness, and he's going to tell the beasts of the field to behave, not hurt us, and he's going to speak to the plants and make them flourish. This navel, you look in the dictionary for that word navel there, tabor, and it means the highest, the supreme, it's like Shangri-La. It's like There's a movie, was it Hidden Valley or something? It was about that. And it's like, it's the fantasy ideal. And if we can imagine that and go, wow, he gave us this promise for 1,000 years. We get to have the Shabbat millennium. Like this Jubilee when he brings all what really belonged to the family back. All the stuff that got given to everybody else and sold off for debts or this or that, all he reverts. The exile, the big Gimel Lamed turns around and it comes back to us. Wow. But these guys Gog and Magog come up with a different plan, a different understanding. Why? Somehow they think that that's bogus. There's another way to read the letters, because they go off of prophecy and oracles and divination. And he says to Israel, don't anybody among you be found to do divination. So, if you crack open an egg and all of a sudden it slides to the other side of the pan and you go, ooh, that must mean I better not stay in the left-hand lane today when I drive on the freeway. I better merge to the right, because it's like, what? It means what? When you see a cloud or when you see something happen or the leaves in your tea, all that's divination. Whenever you try to read into something another meaning, that's divination. And Yahweh said, no divination among anybody of my people. Why? Because we're supposed to have the consciousness of Ehyeh. I just am his people. I exist. I'm his people. I do righteousness, period. Yeah, but what about the past or the future? No past or future, just present tense. We do righteousness, truth and kindness. That's us. We're Am Israel. So the concept of who he is and what he built into the language, the fact there isn't past, present, and future, even though he's talking about past and future, to somewhat, he's almost like telling us, just be like me. Be Kadosh. How do I do that? Well, thinking the way his language thinks is part of it. He goes on to say in verse 13, Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish and all its officers will say to you. Why did he mention those names? Because they mean something. We can look at those. Have you come to seize booty? Is it to take spoils that you have assembled your hoards, carry off silver and gold, to take livestock and property? In other words, something about the people living in Israel, us, hasn't happened yet, but us living in the land will have such great wealth and living in tranquil security that all the other nations would still exist. So this isn't the end of the world yet. They're just going to be drooling and going, what the heck? Let's go take it. We can't take it. Yahweh's their Elohim. What do you mean Yahweh's their Elohim? Where is he? They don't have any walls. They don't even have a big military. And somehow they've got to just sit there and look and go, I don't see no Elohim. See, Israel had an invisible Elohim. The other nations had their gods on a pole, idols and this and that. And the same thing with Egypt. It's like Pharaoh, got burned by the plagues. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, just get out of here. Go serve your Elohim. And then Pharaoh's counselors, I can imagine, said to him, wait a minute, what have you done? We don't have an economy left. Look, everything's ravaged, and you let the entire slave population go of some estimate of about 3 million people. Now what are we supposed to do? What? And all of a sudden he got this idea in his head, and he's like, dang. And he mustered the army, his choice charioteers, and they went on a hot pursuit against the people of Israel, who were running across the desert, and all of a sudden they get to the Yom Suf, the Sea of Reeds, known as the Red Sea, and now what do? We're trapped by the mountains and the ocean, and the Pharaoh and the pillar of fire and smoke hovered there, and kept Pharaoh and the great army at bay till the people got across, and they weren't quite across yet, but all of a sudden the pillar of fire and smoke left, and go get them, Pharaoh. Whoa, yeah, and they went running. The same type of thing is going to be this bug in the ear of Gog and Magog. Why? Well, what does the word Gog and Magog mean? Well, you can't find it in the dictionary, but it's Gimel Vav Gimel, Mem Gimel Vav Gimel. So I have written up here a few things. Mem gimel, mag means to stir with a ladle or to become confused, kind of stirred up. Mem gimel, to squeeze or soften. Or it says bast, which is woody plant fiber. So to soften something up, if you stir something that's otherwise congealed, put it over a flame and stir it up and soften it, now you can make it molten. And it means to melt. Mem vav gimel. Mem gimel hey, correct it or proofread. Hey gimel, to imagine. Like fancy that, or imagine that. Or where we get the word phantom, fantasy. To proofread or correct a text. Hey gimel hey, haga, where we get the root of the word goyim, ponder, remove, correction of a text. Or thorns forming a hedge. Hey gimel yod gimel, hagig, would be musing, meditation, delirium, or imagination. Hey gimel yod vav nun, hagion, is logic, pronunciation, resounding music, worthy, respectable, suitable. In other words, you correct. It's like somebody's got the wrong idea. Somebody's confused. Somebody thinks there's a reality, but it's not. It's like for us to come to understanding Yahuwah is to say, wait a minute, any other religious doctrine is wrong. It's an imaginary phantom. A fake Christ figure is not the same as Mashiach Israel. A fake Holy Spirit is not the same as the Ruach HaKadosh of Yahuwah's Avot. Where's the reality? How do we correct the text? What did he say? What did he write? What's in this language? That's the correction of the text. And for us to come back now and say, let's look at these words. Let's look at the meanings of everything he said and be his people and so get his protection, get his face back upon us. Does he have to be here physically to make that so? No. Well, even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. No, wait a minute. David ruled with the arm of Yahweh, his strength. Yahweh's promise was the strong fortress. Does Yeshua have to come back in person in order to make Ezekiel 36 and 37 happen? Not necessarily. All we have to do is believe what he said and do what he said and be his people. And then somehow when he makes the declaration and causes by his voice, because he said so, the plants to regrow, the land to thrive, the animals, the wild animals to leave us alone. All he has to do is give the word. He doesn't have to come back. Even so, sure, come on back, but it doesn't have to be the case yet. Mem gimel yod hey is the root of the word for magic. Mem gimel mem hey, magma. Again, molten stone, press, squeeze, liquid rock. It also means direction and destination. Mem gimel nun, magan, mogan. Well, that's the word for shield. It means to deliver up, shield, protector, defense. Mem, mem, mag, stammer, stutter, unclear, doubtful. Mem, mem, mag, cut off. Okay, so wait a minute. Gog. Magog, a way of thinking, a way of calculating. So for us to calculate the reading of these words of the Hebrew alphabet, according to our calculation, the real correct way of reading the Paleo is, if you just kind of melt it all down, it's logical that their protection, their era of domination, everybody else is over, is vain, is void. It's kind of like Israel getting out of the Exodus from Egypt and going into the land, and Yahweh said, their time's up. Yeah, there's giants. Yeah, they have strong fortresses. They're all coming down. The walls of Jericho fell. Goliath, boom, rock to the head. Joshua and Caleb, I'm taking the big castles up in the hills. Okay, go take it. Their time there covering is over. So we should push ourselves into being exactly that which has been missing all these years of Earth history. We can now do what no one else has ever done yet. Embody the ideal. We could materialize the fantasy of being Israel. Be the chafatz ba. Be the sweeping inundation which cleanses the land once and for all. 5 minutes. For me to say, that's exactly what these words say. What I just read is exactly how I can read the meaning of the alphabet. That's Gimel Gimel, Gog. But you see, they can read it the same way, only appropriate a different value. I'll say it again. According to our calculation, now picture this as being not just me saying, hey, this is about us, but picture it's them all of a sudden realizing, hey, is there something to this ancient Hebrew alphabet after all? What's it say? All they have to do is have a tweaked divination of not regarding Yahweh, and this is what they think it says. According to our calculation, the correct real way of reading the Paleo is melted down. The Jews are all melted down. The people of Israel got nothing. It's logical that their protection is vain, imaginary. Their God doesn't exist. We don't believe in their God, Yahweh. So we should push ourselves into being exactly, which has been missing all these years of Earth history. How many times has the foreign nations tried to overwhelm the land of Israel? That's why we read about the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem known as the city that eats its inhabitants. The Turks, the Crusaders, the Nazis, the British, everybody gets destroyed. So somebody has to come up with a big idea that says, now it's time to cleanse the earth. Now we should muster hordes of millions of soldiers and just come sweeping in, not with some hang gliders and jeeps and motorcycles like Hamas just did, but no, we're really going to come in and we're just going to just march right through from the north to the south and just take it all over. That's Ezekiel 38. We're going to embody the ideal, materialize the fantasy. We're going to be the sweeping inundation which cleanses the land once and for all. We're going to invade the unwalled, unprotected. Let's just go take their loot. You see, if I'm reading those exact same words to be to the glory of Yahweh, him fulfilling what he said, pouring out his blessing on us, they can read the story the exact same way, only they take it as, let's just go take all this stuff that Yahweh gave his people because their God doesn't really exist and they live in unwalled, unprotected, unmilitarized defenses. Let's just go take it with a force that is completely uncontrollable. That's what the word Gog and Magog means. What I just read was the definition of that I could figure out was the word for Gog. Just for what it's worth, I think I showed this picture once before. A guy named Anaximander drew the map of the world as he understood ancient Greek around 500 BC, where Greece was the center of the universe. Well, here Jerusalem is the center, the navel of the earth. And they only thought of 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe, surrounded by water, and surrounded by that, the 4 winds, and surrounded by that, the 7 fires, and 12 like little diamonds in the alphabet letters and 50 gear wheels, basically. Just kind of like a graphic of this concept of what does it mean to be the navel of the earth? The concept of what is the mechanics, what's the physics, the math, the chemistry of the arets. To think that Yahweh Zavot is the El He of Israel, therefore I need to be his Kadoshi, therefore I need to be like him, thinking his thoughts and walking in his ways, means for me to come to the conclusion, the Shabbat, the Sabbath day really is important. It's like not just important, it's mandatory to continue. And the Moedim is not just culture of, hey, what are them Jews doing? No, it's not Hebrew. No, it's the reality. And there's something about the reality that if I don't sustain the reality, everything fails. If I don't keep breathing, I'm going to die. If my heart doesn't keep beating, for me to keep the Sabbath day and the Moedim is like breathing and heart beating for Israel to be alive. So therefore, for the other nations, other cultures, other religions of Elohim Achrim, the priests of Elohim Achrim, to convince the Goy, how do you think? How do you read? How do you pronounce? To convince the Galut, the kicked out of Israel, just blend with the cultures of the people that you took over. That's what the Catholic Church did. It was a tactic of imperialism, and it's been sustained, but instead of making the Catholic faith true, it blended it with every perversion. That's not kadosh. By definition, it's not kadosh. So for them to calculate gimel, vav gimel, and the place of gimeling being opposite the gimeling of what our thinking and appropriating value to the letters, like the camel going back and forth, like the galut, even so gam back at you, the revolving door. How does this whole thing work? What did Yahweh design for his people to think? And when we are thinking the right way, he's going to somehow provoke those other guys to think a wicked design, and they're going to think, let's just go take these guys. Because he said that his Shem would be exalted on the land. And if his people Israel don't exalt his name in truth on the land, they get kicked out. But when he brings his people back and he says, you want to know what it means that I'm Yahweh? It means that I am the Elohim of my people. And then he's going to put this bug in their ear, or let them logically deduce that they should come in, and it's a trap, with his people being the bait, dwelling in safety. That's the battle of Gog and Magog of Ezekiel 38. When we're dwelling in the land, safety and secure, with abundance of food, abundance of nature, flourishing, rain and crops, like the Garden of Eden, the wild animals not messing with anybody. It's going to so provoke those guys to say, they don't even have a real God. Let's go take all their stuff. That's what pulls them in, and that's where the trap snaps, and there's could be millions of dead bodies. And that's where you read in Ezekiel 38, where it will be in the end of days. They'll come against my people like a cloud covering the earth. I will bring you upon my land in order that the nations may know me when I become sanctified through you before their eyes. And he says he's going to then call for the birds and the beasts to feast on all the dead bodies. And he says, verse 23, the last verse of Ezekiel 38, I will be exalted and I will be sanctified, and I will make myself known before the eyes of many nations. Then they'll know that I am Yahuwah. And it says, verse 11 of chapter 39, it'll be on that day that I will assign Gog a burial site there in Israel. Verse 12, the house of Israel will bury them in order to cleanse the land for 7 months. So see, this is not the end of the world. It's the beginning of a long period of the enemies will know. You don't mess with the Elohim of Israel. Yahweh, who says he's going to do something, he does it. And his name will be magnified in that place, in that land. And if it means that you don't recognize him, so he's going to bring you to the Sea of Reeds and drown you, do you get it yet? There was 10 plagues, not enough? How about this one? Do you understand who Yahweh is now? But even his people didn't get it. We're going to be at time here, last sentence. He's going to do the same thing in Ezekiel 38:39. And the word Gog, verse 7 of Ezekiel 39, I will make my Shem Kadosh known among my people of Israel. I will not desecrate my Shem Kadosh any longer. Then the nations will know that I am Yahweh, the Kadosh one in Israel. Behold, it is coming, that's Bet Aleph, and it will happen, Nam Adonai Yahweh. That's the day of which I have spoken. So the fact that in John 1:1 we could, he's with Elohim and he is Elohim, that's Bet Aleph. That means it's coming. Why does he say that? Because Elohim, Yahuwah Elohim, is the one who says it, and it will happen. That's the essence of his name, not just that he exists, but he says it and it'll happen. And when we take on that mindset with the confidence of saying, I'm Kadosh LaYahweh, that's the it of being. Ehyeh. Time to go.
Hallelujah, Father. We praise thee and we thank thee for opening our eyes, for bringing us back, for showing us, Abba, the fact that we did not know who we were, yet now we know in thine own essence who we are, that we are thine heirs, that we are thine people, and that thou art opening our understanding for the instructions to follow. Be thou our strength and allow us to proclaim from the top of our lungs, from the depth of our heart, that Yahweh Eloheinu. Hallelujah, Abba. Amen.
Amen.